video games have become a much bigger part of society. Let's take South Korea, for example. In South Korea, MLG, or Major League Gaming, has grown to quite a phenomenal rate. Not only do they play these games and have some of the best teams, but they also air on their televisions events such as League of Legends World Tournaments and StarCraft 2 professional matches. Now, the common thing about these games is they all have some form of violence. And video game violence today and in the United States has been targeted by the media, saying it is very bad. At first, I'll be looking at, is the rise of crime due solely to violent video games? And then I'll talk about how do kids get their hands on these video games and other parenting issues that come up. And then I'll finally talk about what do violent video games teach you. Now let's look at some statistics. Is the rise of crime due only to violent video games? Well, according to Video Games and Violence, the facts, as a matter of fact, juvenile violent crimes have been decreasing as the video game industry has been growing much larger. Not only that, but according to Shooting in the Dark, there are seasonal peaks. During the summer, there's much higher violent crimes and violent behavior ratings than there are during the holidays. But video game sales don't peak until seasonal holidays such as Christmas. Not only that, but according to Do Violent Video Games Contribute to Youth Violence, they have also stated that people point out that some of these kids or adults who are doing these shootings play violent video games. But what about the other 90% boys and the 40% girls who also play violent video games but show no aggressive behavior or do any shootings? Are these select few going to dictate whether or not these other ones can have fun? Now, let's look at how these kids get their hands on these violent video games. According to Do Violent Video Games Help Contribute to Shootings in General, it states that the ESRB rating system, or the Entertainment Software Rating Board, was specifically created to avoid violent video games entering the hands of impressionable youth. The rating system goes E for everyone, as in it's very cartoony and very little violence, so anyone can play it without fear of growing violent behaviors. Then it goes to T for teens, which means kids 13 and up, where you must be at least 13 to be able to comprehend the violence and other themes they put in these games. And then finally, and here's where much of the big drama comes in, there are the rated M games, which are rated M for mature, which means you have to be 17 or up. Now, the problem is kids who shouldn't even be able to get teen games are getting their hands on rated M games, even though stores that sell video games require an ID license to register whether or not you are 17. Now, so how are these kids getting their hands on these rated M games? Well, they're having kids or parents buy them for them. And the parents unknowingly buy violent video games without them even knowing what is on them. So, what can parents do to avoid their kids getting their hands on violent video games? Well, quite simply, what parents can do is they can look on the ESRB rating system, which is on the right-hand corner on both the front and the backs of the box. If it has an M, it means it's rated mature. Then you should look on the back of the box where it lists all the things that are in this game. From there, you should be able to judge whether your kid can behavior and is mature enough to play these games. Just because they're young doesn't mean they're not mature enough to play them. But if you feel your kid is not mature or that he may take things bad from this game, you should be able to say no and stop buying them for them. So, this is one way parents can help avoid this problem. But what do violent video games actually teach children? Violent video games, according to what science knows about video game and violence, shows that even if you play video games, the only consequence that comes from it is a short-term aggression, which even then the short-term aggression isn't very highly spiked. It's increased very slightly. And it's also been done in tests that are not necessarily flawless. For example, they have done testing where after some time kids have played violent video game, they did a test with both kids who did not play violent video games and kids who did on whether or not the amount of hot sauce they would give to a student. Now this could be flawed in many different ways. For example, do the students know the other student? And if so, would that somehow affect them? And also, being such short term, it shouldn't lead to any major real world violence. Now let's look over all I've talked about. I talked about how the statistics of video game violence show that video games violence, although some are affected, there are very few. And overall, the juvenile crimes have gone down when video game sales have been going up. Then I talked about how kids get their hands on these violent video games and how parents should regulate whether or not they buy games for their student or for their children. Then I talked about what violent video games teach and how science, all they really know is that violent video games increase short-term aggression. Now, the next time someone starts telling you that violent video games have been ruining the youth, now you can explain to them the statistics, what parents can do to prevent them, and do violent video games actually really teach them anything at all?